Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Well, good morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and today we are discussing the career of Ming Cho Lee on Light Talk.
And this is David, coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. So welcome everyone to episode 187 and our very special tribute to Ming Cho Lee. As many of you know, last weekend we heard the sad news of Ming Cho Lee's passing. This is a monumental loss to our art and to our lives. Ming was known as the Dean of American Stage Design. His contributions to the art are immeasurable. We could spend the whole show listing his Broadway shows, international operas, and all the awards he has received. But let's just say that no theater artist has been as prolific and accomplished as Ming. He was honored by artists, countries, and humanitarians for the artistic and humanitarian work that he accomplished in his life. Ming taught stage design at Yale for over 40 years and educated many of the world's most prominent stage designers. Today we have two of Ming's Yale graduates with us, both incredibly accomplished and both friends of the Lumen Brothers. We are welcoming today Anne Sheffield, who is head of stage design at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and Chris Barreca, who is head of set design at Cal Arts. So thank you, Anne and Chris, for being with us today. It's really good to see you again. So let's get the ball rolling. And first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your relationship with Ming? Chris, would you like to start?
Well, it's a huge topic because I had a relationship with Ming for 40 years. And that says something about Ming right away, which is that he was one of these teachers. And actually, as someone who teaches now, obviously Ming was incredibly influential over my teaching as well, particularly in this area of the way in which Ming not only taught many of the great designers in the country and in the world, but also maintained over his entire career. And for me, 40 years, I had a relationship with Ming that was not every week, but, at least once a month, a conversation. And, even in the later years, I saw him right before COVID took over our lives. And I think that Ming's way of doing that, or his ability to do that, was a lot because he really immediately saw his students as colleagues. Right. He treated you as a peer, not as a student. It was something sort of difficult at first when you were a student of Ming's because, the traditional way of dealing with students was missing from Ming's discourse. Ming loved to talk. And so you could get into very lengthy conversations with Ming, but he also was an amazing questioner. He really was curious. He was one of the people that I've known that's the most interested in the world and what other people thought. And it was a key to his success in a way as a designer, but also as a teacher. He was constantly peppering me with questions, even the last time I saw him. In that case, it was much about politics, but and about my family. But he would ask questions, and then he would listen. He had this way of listening. You could tell how deeply Ming was listening by the way he would look at you and engage with people, and also how he could remember everything you said.
That's a bad.
Even from 40 years ago, he remembered discussions we had as students. He also remembered. It was funny recently that I was one of the only people that could ever beat him at opera quiz, and that's because I was a music major and I had like 8 semesters of music history. So that's just a general thing about Ming. What he meant to me is in a big way. You can't say like a parent. Oh my God, Ming was, my confidant. I don't know. It's very hard to say.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's too many adjectives. There are too many ways to describe it.
Well, what's so interesting, Chris, is that, and I know you know this story, but I don't think anyone else does, is that, when I came back to SMU and Bill Eckhart asked me to rebuild that whole stage design program again, the first person I called to find a set designer, because Bill was, back then, he wanted to cut down. He was professor emeritus. He just only wanted to teach one class a week. And I asked Ming, I said, who could you recommend? And the first name out of his mouth was yours. And that's how Chris and I met. And we basically, the two of us, rebuilt that program back in the 90s. It was it was probably the best years of my life. I'm happy to say that probably the best years of my life was both as a student and as a teacher at SMU, and working with Chris. And we had a really, really great dynamic there and synergy that was going on. And the people we hired were great, and the students we recruited were great. So it was wonderful. But that's what Ming really thought about you, Chris. Out of all of the students that he had taught, your name was the first name that he gave me. So I think that says a lot. Anne, how about you? What was your relationship like?
Oh, my goodness. I think certainly I can back up everything that Chris says about the man that was Ming and the teacher that was Ming and the person. I think I intersected with him before I was really seriously considering set design. It was really happenstance in a way. I had an undergraduate professor who entered me into the American College Theater Festival, and Ming happened to be the adjudicator in DC. And I can remember walking into the room, and there, all 8 regions are represented, and I felt very inadequate. There was no drafting. There was barely a model. It was a sketch and a little blurb about what I did. And I was very fortunate because he could see past, I guess, those deficiencies. And that was, I think, a gift that he gave a lot of people, that he took risks on. And I'm certainly one of those, I'm sure. That he could see into perhaps our soul or something through whatever means he was able to. And I can remember him pulling me aside, and he says, I don't know, if you're thinking about grad school, I've got this little place out east. It's like, and I said, oh, I'm not ready. I'm going to work for a year in LA. Right? Idiot. So it took me that long really to realize that the rewards that I was feeling in doing little tiny theater in Los Angeles, and then I was sort of interning at a advertising firm or something, I was getting more out of the theater experience. And I can remember just saying, okay, I'm going to take a leap of faith and apply to NYU and Yale. And there's kind of a funny story there, but I really feel so grateful that I chose the one where I got to spend more time with this amazing man. And he did. I think a number of us have, during the graduate school summers, I got to work in a studio. And so really that's when you're sort of embraced by Betsy, which is really important too, and his wife. And I would have to say that their kids were about my age. And I did feel like, even though I was born in New York City, we moved out of America, right after I was born. So the city was a new and exciting challenge, and they were there with me. They were like surrogate parents in a way. They would stand at the door. They'd send me down to the Blueprint place, remember downtown? And Betsy would have written out, this is before we had GPS and everything, and she knew I was very challenged geographically. So there were like how many steps you take to the left when you get out of the subway. And they would be waiting at the door of their apartment when I came back successfully. They're like, we sent her out and she came back. So I think that level of interest in people from every walk of life and that makes him such a wonderful theater person too, because he is interested in the human story and he's interested in every story. I hope in some small way, every once in a while, I can measure up to what he brought into the classroom.
Yeah. It's interesting because the three of us, we all sort of knew Ming in the same way because I had him as a teacher for a year because there was a year where Bill and Ming swapped. Bill went to teach at Yale, Ming came to teach. So I kind of had a taste of Ming as a student, which was, I was watching that great documentary that was posted. I think it's called The Essence of Ming. We have it posted on the Light Talk Facebook page. And Ralph Funicello talks about that when you go to class with Ming, if you do something good that he likes, he'll just look at it and say, yeah, that's very, very good. But all the time was spent on the bad projects. So let me tell you something. I took a lot of Ming's time. And my favorite comment that he gave me was, for lighting designer, not bad. That was his
probably
comment.
a high compliment.
Yeah, that was a very high compliment. And it was very funny. And of course, I've told that story before where I did this horrible design and he looked at it. You know how Ming used to draw out the design on the blackboard and say, nah, this is where you went wrong. This is where if you change this line, this would have worked better. Where he copied my platform and then he erased it. He went ahead and drew the platform. He erased it. He tried drawing the platform a third time. He throws the chalk down and said, platform's so ugly, even I can't draw it. So now, I told that story to my class this morning, and they all laughed, of course. And I said, but it's the way he said it. Some people could say that's mean, but it wasn't because there's love. There was so much love in his heart. And then later on, the whole idea of working with him as a colleague, when I called him up about finding Chris. And for years, they embraced me and they embraced my students. And I know he's done the same for you, Anne, and of course for you, Chris, as well. So that humanity, that lifelong relationship that you have with somebody was very, very important. And I'm glad that you guys experienced that.
So if I forced you to crystallize it, what do you think Ming meant to stage design overall? And we can go on and on about all the specifics, but could you sort of encapsulate that for us?
Probably not well enough, but
Give it a shot.
I would say that his, the idea of it being a sculptural world, that he could draw from Milziner and the painterly and Boris Aronson and the sculpture and somehow synthesize that and also manipulate it for whatever the material was and the venue. He had an uncanny sense of composition, I think, that was actually quite painterly. But he could turn that into an incredible three-dimensional space. And it was spare in the sense that there was nothing unnecessary on the stage. And everything was very, very purposeful. And in the same way, it had a way of storytelling. And I guess, he was positioned at a very interesting time when, theater was flexing its muscles about what it could put on stage and what might be possible. And I think what an amazingly perfect individual to take us to that next vision, that next place. And he was able to be intimate if he was in a tiny theater in terms of what the experience between the stage and the audience was. And he was also able with all those operas to be monumental and yet poignant. I mean, I guess it was that ability to bring both sensibilities in whatever scale he was working in. People better than me have expressed it a lot better, but I just, in terms of, my background was in painting before, and I think that is the lucky thing that way back he said, okay, we're going to see if this, amateur painter, we can let her start to think in three dimensions. And, with a script and with really getting into the characters of that script and really finding that as the key, those relationships between people. It's all about people, for him.
Yeah, so I totally think everything you said, Anne, was great. And I would just add that, Ming was like the Picasso of stage design. He was somebody who kept redefining himself. He was not someone who was satisfied like Picasso, he would say, I have to do something different. So he kept reinventing himself. And if you look at his early designs, if you just look at his book, it's crazy. You look at the beginning and you look at the end. He's like a different artist. And a lot of designers and artists in general, visual artists, can become really known for really a style their whole life. And you can't say that about Ming. And he instilled that. I think that's, we'll probably talk about him as a teacher later, but that is a reason he was a great teacher, because he was very interested in being a change agent. And he would talk about that. And he was really pushing students to find their own voice, which not all teachers do. And, people always say, everybody came out looking like Ming. We all then became our own people, very, very quickly, because that actually isn't what he was doing. We just had a tendency, and he was so amazing that you would copy for a while, for a short time.
Don't we all?
Right? But the other thing is that Ming was I'm sorry, I'm throwing out names.
Oh, go for it.
He was the Socrates of design too. He was such a philosopher.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways he's probably known for that more than for his actual designs, even though he was an amazing designer. I think as a kind of philosopher of what it meant to be an artist, what it meant to be a part of culture, what culture needed to be and was important. Think about what he did for Times Square.
Right.
He was, they thought they just would get somebody on the Broadway commission. And he was he drove the whole narrative in terms of what happened in Times Square. And that's just one small example of a contribution that he made that is outside design. I mean, he also designed the Chinese wing at the Metropolitan Museum. And again, they thought, he's whatever. And no. For him, it was totally philosophical, how it had to happen, the process with China and how everything had to happen. It was completely philosophical for him. I was around him right at that time. Ming was not insecure. I mean, like any good artist, he was somebody who was very interested in and loved his own work. But he was also always looking at theatrical heute, and he was looking at what the Europeans were doing. He was forever trying to learn from other people. And he was the first person who joked with me, and I mean, I've used that joke a million times, when he said, I'm always stealing from you. Well, I teach so I can steal from you. And he did. But I think there was something about that way in which he really believed in this kind of the cacophony, if you think of the theater as like the Tower of Babel, except for it's not Babel, you can hear all the voices, Ming was really good at, in that noise, seeing really clearly what was coming next and then doing it. So he was always a little bit of a step ahead as a result of other people, in the US particularly. But, he was highly respected in places in Europe and around the world for, again, this uncanny way in which Ming seemed to be kind of always on the cutting edge, even when he was quite, advanced in age.
Okay, let's talk about Ming and education, because he has such an amazing career, and we're looking at 2.5 of his students here, because I consider myself half, maybe 1/3. But Anne and Chris, you too were there for 3 years, and obviously you knew Ming for longer, and you both became amazing educators. Where you're at now, it just tells the whole story. So what did Ming mean to education?
So another huge topic, because he taught for such a long time. But I think that just personally, and Anne touched on this earlier, I was not a design student when I went to Yale. I was a technical student. And I had been working, I was a music major in college, as David knows. What happened was that Ming was never one to pull punches. I wanted very quickly, I became very close friends with people like Doug Stein and other people that were designers around me, Susan Hilferty. Because I made things for them. I made it possible for them to do their work. And basically, I went into Ming. Well, what happened is Michael Juergen, I was in the design for non-design majors, and Michael Juergen, who's still teaching at Yale, brought me to Ming and said, Ming, you should look at this guy, and don't look at what he's drawing, just listen to him talk. Because, I was already, I grew up in an intellectual family, readers, my dad was a lawyer, I was good at arguing, and also I loved to read, and I loved history, and so, I was very much about the ideas. And then Ming looked at me and he said, well, you cannot draw. And you're not an artist. You might be an artist, he said, as a musician, but you're not a visual artist. And he said, so what are you going to do about that? And he looked at me and I said, well, I don't know. And so he said, well, you go to the Art Students League during the summer. And since I was working in New York anyways, in the shops, and I got the shop that I was working for at the time, which was Atlas Scenic Studio, to put me on the night shift. So I was like driving trucks in and out of New York, full of scenery and doing all kinds of crazy things. And then I went to the Art Students League during the day because I was putting myself through school. And I drew 8 hours a day for 3 months until I just saw bodies floating in my head. And I brought on my work back, and Ming looked at it and he said, okay, you know how to learn things. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, you're very deliberate. You took this as a challenge. He said, most people think drawing is only you have some gifts. And he said, you're proving that that's not true.
You've defied gravity.
Well, because he drew naturally. I think he drew from the time he was 2 years old or something. And so he said, so a lot of improvement. So then he said, so for them, I became, Chris's technical student who wants to be a designer. And what happened really with me and my relationship with Ming is that, with Ming, you had to earn his respect. Yeah. And I think as a teacher, it's a really interesting balance because I think it's a hard thing. You of course, he was super, super critical of people. He was really, really, really amazing in terms of how he could thread that needle by, you wanted his respect because everything he would say was a kind of challenge. So what he was doing with me all the time was challenging me. But I mean, it wasn't like he was saying that to me to as a kind of judgment about me personally. It was a challenge. And he did that all the way along. And, I wasn't given a production right away. I got it because another student kind of collapsed and fell out of the program. And so I took over a show that was a little show called As I Lay Dying, which was by William Faulkner, which was directed by a guy named Grafton Mowen, who I'm still friends with, who wrote, directed, composed the music, and played the music during the entire show. Every night. Yeah. And the two of us worked together, and there was, I'm not going to name the other student, although I could, Ming, and there was another student who was, one of the favorites in the program. And while we were designing the show, and there would be these meetings, and Grafton would say, "It's almost Christmas. Just wait. We'll design over." And I said, okay. So he said, "Just nod your head." He said, "If we don't say anything, they'll shut up quicker," which was true with me. and so we just went, "Whoa, okay." And then I went away, and we designed this truly immersive experience. And a pretty crazy production. And I brought in this half-inch model because people weren't doing half-inch models at Yale. So I had this half-inch model. I had it in a rolling dolly. I had built this crate for it. I would roll it from my apartment. I set it up for Ming. And he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he said, "You didn't do what we discussed." And I said, "No." And he looked at Grafton. He said, "Is this what you want to do?" And Grafton said, "Oh yeah, this is definitely what I want to do." And Ming said, "Okay." And he let us do it. But what was implicit in that I realized, because usually That was like the highest form of respect I could have gotten. Because if Ming didn't think what you were doing was interesting to him, he would argue with you incessantly. So that's when I knew that Ming, and it was right after that he hired me. I started working at his office because I did something that he didn't know about. He looked at it and he went, I don't know what this is. And so that's the highest compliment you can pay a teacher. And I've learned that myself, which is that Ming was not dogmatic. If you did something that surprised him, he got really excited. Do you know what I mean? As a teacher. And that's really, really good teaching.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't about ego with Ming. It was about respect, and it was about humanity. And he treated you like a human being. How about you, Ann?
So first of all, I did walk into that class the first time. And I think we were one of the first classes that had the studio space where we were all together. And there was, and I love these guys dearly. There were two guys who had already assisted in New York in my class. And there was another one whose father was an architect, and another one who was, really out there experimental artist. And I just felt like I don't know what I am. I don't know what I am. I don't have I was sort of I was brought up in London, it's like children are seen and not heard in that society a little bit. So it was he helped me find my voice, I would say, I think more than anything. And part of that was that first project, of course, Oedipus. And he sent us away with very little instruction, as far as I remember. I don't remember instruction. It's like you're gonna go home, and 2 weeks later, or a week later, you're gonna come back and you're gonna show us your designs for Oedipus. And I wasn't. I had smatterings of, studying of the Greeks and everything like that, but I was certainly not a scholar in that. And so I went to the script and I did research, and I had lots of pictures and lots of sketches and sketches and sketches and sketches, because this is what I could do, I guess. And we all put our work up. And he got to me, he pinned it up on the board, and he takes a long time looking at every single sketch, and you're like melting inside. Maybe you're crying inside, maybe you're hopeful, maybe, like all those emotions happen, right? And he turned around to me, and you have to forgive us because we all do a little bit of a Ming interpretation. It's hard not to. But he says, "Oh my God, Annie Sheffield, I do not know if you have Oedipus here, but lovely picture postcard of Greece." And
there you go.
Do you know what he meant? He's like, you can't hope to put the Acropolis on stage. The Acropolis is the Acropolis. And so what you have to find is you have to find your heart. You have to find your way in. You have to find the bigger idea, I suppose, than just replicating some architecture and putting it on the stage, no matter how pretty that might be. It's not getting to the heart of the matter. And that was day one, basically. So, and then I would say also, some of the times he wouldn't let you rest on your abilities also. So I was fortunate enough to design an Athol Fugard play. It was the only one that actually did not go on to New York. But it was wonderful to meet that man and to be able to work with him. And he trusted us to go have meetings with these incredible playwrights or directors or whatever, and come back to him. And I think about that now, and I'm like, oh my God, like there was not the hovering that you hear from the outside, really. And I came back with a sketch that Mr. Fugard was very pleased with, and we were doing this at the Rep, and Ming goes, okay. But I think you can improve, So, and it was this big sketch. And before he even let me get to the model, I think I sketched that 8 times, like in big 1/2-inch scale, like da-da-da-da. And I hadn't really had perspective drawing. I was very lucky. I kind of understood how to put 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional plane. I saw things that way. It did become harder to turn that into a model and drafting. But so what I'm saying in that is that if he saw something that had potential, he wouldn't let you rest on its early potential. He made you take it further and take it to the best possible thing that you could produce for that particular moment. And I think that was a big learning curve too. It wasn't like, oh, whew, great, I passed that. It was like, you may have passed it, but you can take it further. So.
How much of what you do now comes from Ming?
Oh my gosh. I mean, don't we always hear start strong, end strong?
Well, that's the basic music. That's what I teach all the time. You start the song together, you end the song together. Everything in the middle is jazz, right?
I mean, just the other day, I was like, we're recording videos now. I'm having to teach drawing and rendering actually remotely, which is ridiculous. But, and I'm listening to my voice as I'm making these recordings for them. And it's even with the ink, with the paintbrush, with the pencil, with the, it just is the development of that line, that lyrical line, whether it is physical or whether it's an idea, is just really what I try to keep in mind, and I would say I feel very fortunate to have assisted both in Ming's studio and Tony Walton's studio. And they were, in a way, antithesis about their way into the work. And I think they both really allowed me to find, within those different structures, allowed me to find my own way. But yes, all of those mantras that we got from Ming are constantly sort of swimming like little bees humming around, in your head.
That's pretty funny. So Chris, tell us about Ming's process in teaching stage design.
Ming had an incredible sense of how educational structure is as important as what he would say to you on a day-to-day basis, because he believed that his job, he used to say actually, he said, I can't make you a great designer, but I can give you the process. And he was really, really big on getting us the process and the discipline process, if you will, of that if you took these steps, you may not get to a brilliant design, but you would get to a design, if you followed a certain, like he wasn't, again, this interesting thing when I think about it about, that I really did learn him not to talk to students dogmatically, not to say, what do you say, this is good or bad? Like Ming often would, you'd expect him to say good or bad. No, he would challenge people a lot. He would argue, but he wouldn't say this is good and this is bad. But he would also really harp on process. He would spend a lot of time, and I do that too. I mean, I definitely picked up on the way in which Ming taught us process, and I teach the same process, I have to admit. I teach very differently, and I think very differently than Ming, but the process is the same, and because it's a really good one. And if you ask me to do, that's a whole class. We'd have to spend a whole nother hour or something. But it and I think that was, that's what I do the same.
Chris, can you take us on that journey with Ming and Clambake?
Well, it's interesting because Clambake, I taught undergraduates up at Columbia right away. Like I never thought I'd be a teacher, but Ming was such a good teacher, he made me want to teach. But I wasn't teaching graduate students. And so I was working for Ming when he started Clambake. And so the first thing he did is he made me come and be there all the time.
It was hard.
He insisted. He said, you are working for me. You have to talk to every single student here. I was like, okay. Whatever you say. Oddly enough, because I wasn't a quote unquote a design student, I didn't go to the thing that happened before that, whatever it was called.
The leagues,
called the
I
league,
think.
the league show.
I didn't go to the league things. Me and George Sippitt, we had that in common. George and I have remained friends for years because we did. But at any rate, we were not voted most likely to succeed or whatever. but the Clambake was a reaction to, of course, the leagues, but it was something more important for Ming. And that I learned because I was working for him. He was very clear that philosophically, he felt that through exposing the students to each other and the faculty having to see it, the work of other schools, that he could change American education. It was like a mission for him. And by God, he did it. And he did it through Clambake. And so in that sense, he went around and chose the students that would get to show. And so he got to actually show every faculty member how he was like, again, the Socrates thing, he was like determined, very determined to shape what he believed was important about theater culture. It was not about them all taking on the Ming method, actually. It was about them actually learning what good teaching was and what bad teaching was. And it wasn't about a right way to teach or a wrong way to teach. It was just like, I can see this is bad teaching. This is good teaching. And so over 25 years it went on. It was quite amazing. And of course, I went through the journey of then having my own students go with you, David, first at SMU and then at Cal Arts. And Ming talked, and I said this thing about him forcing me to go around when I was working for him and how exhausting it was. And he did it. He
talked to everybody.
He talked to everyone.
Yeah.
He would critique every single person.
And there were a lot of people there. There were like 57, 65 or something like that.
By the end, it was 100.
It was crazy. And he would talk to everybody and spend time.
Over the course of one weekend, yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Just the energy. So you have to say another thing about Ming. He had an amazing amount of energy.
I know. The dedication.
Betsy had more. If you can imagine.
Well, and you can't talk about Clambake without mentioning Betsy.
Chris, do you remember the circumstances? Isn't there a story of he and Michael Juergen on the shore, cooking up this idea or the name of it? Like, I can't ever remember exactly.
You're right. That I think that's partially how it came up. But it was because they couldn't think of what to name it. Actually. But it's funny how it stuck. I don't think he thought it would stick, but it became a thing.
And it was less imposing than hearing the leagues. I think that was another thing. He was humble about it.
And when he would give his little speeches, he would say, "And I'm paying for this, so I can do it."
And he did. A lot of it came out of his pocket too. And many of us went to him and said, let us pay for a little bit of this. He said, no. He said, you paid for your students, you're paying for your housing, I'm taking care of all this. And he would, pick these nice restaurants and pay for the lunches. It was amazing the amount of money that they would spend on this. Ming was a Mensch. He was a Mensch. And for people who don't know what Mensch is, it's a Yiddish term for someone who just gives and wants to make people happy. And him and Betsy were like that and are like that. So, it was a beautiful thing.
It was an amazing opportunity for, I think, for the professionals and the students alike. What a unique weekend that was. I always looked forward to it, and you could connect with old friends, and you could also see what's going on around the country. He was smart to do that.
And it led to others that are still going on to this day. Steve has one. Chris, you're part of another one. And, of course, Showcase West, Showcase East. All that is happening, which is wonderful for the students.
But nothing replaces, because Clambake, to riff off of what Ann said, is that by his mission to bring everybody together across the country, for everybody's work to be exposed to each other, it also had this amazing impact on the profession year to year. Because you did see every year the cohort that was going out into the world.
Yeah. What's the favorite play this year? What's the favorite assignment?
Okay, well, so this is a bit of a touchy subject, but I in the age of political activism, how would you characterize Ming's world from a political perspective?
Well, I know, and I know that Chris knows, and I think Chris is probably, I'm going to hand that to you because I think, I don't mean to duck out, but I would say, Ming was, he completely valued the idea of being able to vote. And I think it stems from his early experiences and coming to the United States and everything. And so, it's been said so many times, if you weren't registered to vote, you had to leave class and go sign up. I mean, that's the deal. He didn't tell you what you had to vote, although it was pretty clear where he lived in his heart. But yeah, I think that was incredibly important to him.
You remember, when was it, back in 2002 when he won the National Awards for the Arts? There's this great, little shot of in that little documentary film, but he's there on the steps, and I remember him saying, he goes, thank you very much. I was honored. He goes, too bad it was George Bush who gave me this award. I think he would have preferred Barack Obama. But he also said things like if you're doing this and you don't have something to say about it, you shouldn't be doing it.
Well, he thought the theater was created as a vehicle for political discourse. Mm-hmm. And so he didn't think that anything in the theater wasn't political. He thought every play was political, even when it wasn't about politics. And sometimes he thought even more about it being political, the less about politics it was, However, when I worked for Ming, Betsy used to say, you guys have to stop arguing and do more drafting. Because Ming and I would he loved to argue politics in his studio. He could do the most intricate drawing and argue at the same time. He was really incredibly gifted at multitasking. And that way. And it's a very funny little anecdote for you, David, because when Ming came to this meal, when we invited him to do a week, and he did that project. Well, every night afterwards, I would drive Ming and Betsy back to their hotel. And every night, because it was during the Clinton impeachment thing, Ming and I would sit in the car and talk politics, and Betsy would go in. She'd have dinner.
And dessert.
And she would say, look, guys, sorry, I'm going to bed. It was like unbelievable. But he was so, it was so important to him. It's just really funny.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I think it's just that civic pride. I mean, it's like do your thing and be involved and be aware and bring that to the work.
Well, which one of you want to start discussing the humanity of Ming?
Aww. I mean, we've kind of, you have to hear it in everything we've said. He cared so deeply. I think the first thing sometimes that people hear is how tough he is, but he was, I don't know, he had an amazing compass, an amazing ability to understand or help you see clearly right and wrong without telling you, like we've been saying, without saying this is how things should be. But you became a better person around him, I think. And I think his gift is in that caring for the students and caring for the work and caring for the world and caring that, justice is carried out at every level of the way he lived. And honestly, he's a Buddha. I'm just so admired and so loved and so revered, for very good reason.
For Ming, we were all his family. But you earn the love of your family. It doesn't happen. There are a lot of families that don't talk to each other. And you could tell a lot about Ming by when they had that huge, which was basically a fundraising party for Ming. that James Bundy threw in New York, and I'm sure you were there, and
Yeah. It was so crowded.
it's so crazy, right? But the thing that was really interesting is that what Ming did is he put the focus on his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And
Katie. Oh my God.
unbelievable, right? And it said so much about Ming that he believed that I've likened it to Ming really liked to see other people succeed.
He did.
And that's not true of a lot of people.
No.
I mean, when he got the Tony Award for the K2, didn't he? He attributed his award to Alan Lee Hughes, the wonderful lighting designer. You know what I mean? Like he can't. He knows it's collaborative. In the end, he's the most humble person out there.
This is not even common in teaching. He really liked, and that was imbued after you left. They wanted you to succeed, and it wasn't just wanting; they enabled, they participated in your success. And loved every minute of it. Yeah.
Well, it was like what I said earlier about him being a Mensch. And that's really what it's all about. We're all fortunate to be touched by this man. And I think that makes you two such great teachers. I just think that it's really something to say about how we continue in this world and how we keep that spirit alive. And, I had only one more thing that I wanted to talk about today, and that is, I don't know how Ming could have done half of what he accomplished without Betsy. And the amazing humanity of her as well, but really the driving force of organization. I mean, he was such a genius when it came to things that he could also fly off, and do some crazy. He needed somebody to wrangle him, if you want to talk about Dallas terms, right? To wrangle that boy up and to keep him on that line. And and to this day, she is it. So how do you all feel about the influence that Betsy had on Ming?
Betsy, I think, was his home base, you know what I mean? And so many of our sort of home base. She was also our connectivity. She was like, you kind of, I don't know how to explain it. She was like my mama in a way, And even today, I would still, and it was not even an auntie. It was like a mama, She was really so caring. She fed us. Oh my God. I lived on those lunches, Chris. I don't know about you. I didn't have breakfast. I didn't have dinner. It was like, and there was so much food on the table. And these people, Ming and Betsy, you've got to know, if you don't know, lived very humbly. So everything they put into their work or their students, in terms of any kind of, I would say, Betsy, I think I told you this, David, the first time, there's so many little pictures that are going through my mind right now. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Oh my God. Just amazing woman, a loving woman. And I can remember just we had to go, she goes, Annie, come with me. We're going to go to the CVS. And little Katie, their grandchild, she says, I need you to go with me so I can go in the store and you can have Katie in the little pram outside. Right. There was not a big division between what our jobs was at any given moment in that studio. It was like, this will help me out right now. And you never questioned her, and she was always right. So,
right.
Betsy was a high up in the management of the public theater when Ming and Betsy met and fell in love, obviously.
Right.
And but what was really, really interesting is Ming could barely tie his shoes. And Betsy, no, he in fact did tie his shoes often when I was working there. But the thing is that they complemented each other so brilliantly. She was, as Ann said, a manager, but she was also, if you think about it, Ming was his mind was really out here and focused on one thing. And Betsy was the person who was looking at everything.
Right.
And so what would happen is if you had a question, I mean, when I started working for Ming, Betsy was still his first assistant. She still made models. She still did drafting. She still told you what to do every day. And then I don't know if I was the first there was a woman before me who was the first assistant, but then I became, I guess, the second person who was the first assistant because Betsy had decided she really, because of the boys, she just had too much on her plate. They were in high school when I was there. And she needed to make sure that they succeeded through, got stuff done, And, but Betsy was like this person who, without which Ming couldn't do what he wanted to do, and she couldn't do what she wanted to do without him. And so the two of them were like this perfect unit. And that carried all the way through Clambake and everything else. Because, Betsy used to go around in the early Clambake and she would talk to students too. Mm-hmm. I mean, later it just again became too much and she had to focus on, she had this managing the whole thing. It got so big. Right. But Betsy was in her own right quite she was the master model maker and she knew every technique. I learned most of my model making techniques from Betsy. Mm. More than drafting. She didn't really draft that much. That was really Ming's thing.
Right.
But
beautiful drafting.
Yeah, right. And there was this, this symbiosis that you don't see in too many relationships of because usually people can't work together in that way and be married to each other. Right. That's not normal at all. And of course, we used to joke because, they slept in the studio. Their bed was. Yeah. So every night you take the drafting, and I'm the one who took the drafting off the table one morning. You
were that person.
No, we were doing convention at the Met, and all the drafting was like huge. The sheets were enormous. And I would have to take, it was like 105 sheets of drafting. So I would take the drafting off my table every morning and put it on the bed. And I would often get there before, I would get there at 8 and sometimes, Ming would usually be in the bathroom and Betsy would be somewhere, usually buying. But that morning they were, and so I put the drafting on and about 10 minutes later, the drafting starts to move. I'm like, oh no, I can't believe I did that.
I heard about that. Oh my God.
And yes. They said, Chris, I think you should go away.
Go to Dallas.
So I took the cue and I went and got some coffee and I came back in an hour.
This is why he recommended you, Chris. This is why he told me. There's this guy who works with Chris Barreca. Fantastic. Take him.
I will tell a little secret that Betsy figured out. And only Betsy would figure it. She never told Ming. So Ming thought I was a genius drafts person because I was producing for the Met and other places a sheet of very complicated drafting every day. And Betsy figured out that I was taking it home every night. I was finishing it in my apartment and then bringing it the next morning. She was good. She was very discreet. My point is that one of Betsy's secrets for the longevity of their relationship, she never talked out of school. Betsy never told stories. I mean, we're telling more stories today than I ever heard Betsy tell stories. Right, Ann? I mean, she just didn't do it. Even at Clambake, people would try to goad her into telling stories. She would never tell stories. No many stories. Never any stories.
She doesn't want to hear it. Wow, that's fantastic. We've had a tough year. We lost a lot of great people, and Ming is one of them. And these are friends, obviously, and mentors. And also the memory, obviously, of these great people. Like Hal Binkley, Hal just passed away. It's just unbelievable. But there's a jewel in our hearts that we will take with us. And especially as educators, all 5 of us, we do this not for the money, as we used to say all the time, right? But it's because I think meeting people and not only meeting, but being influenced and taught by people like Ming and Bill and Jean Eckhart and Gilbert and the people who do it because they love what they do. I think that's really, really important. And that's why I wanted to bring the 2 of you on the show today, because I know that Ming will always be in your hearts. Is there one final thought you want to give our listeners today about Ming?
He's going to be missed. He's going to be missed. And he is loved. And I hope he's up there with RBG.
Yeah, he's up there. And they're both hitting themselves on the forehead. Saying,
I'm just saying. Yeah.
Chris?
I would just leave it that study Ming. I think if you don't know him, if you don't know his work, study him. There's a nice book, and get to know him. And then, yeah.
Well, thank you, Ann and Chris, for being with us today on Light Talk. I'm sure that Ming is looking down and saying, "Oh, Chris, he forgot that story. He didn't tell that correctly." And Annie, she's such an amazing artist. She should just paint and paint and paint and paint and keep painting, and you are. And David, your platforms still have major problems. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
For today only, we guarantee the accuracy of all statements, every story, and the opinions of our guests made on this podcast. However,
since it's all true, we might not need the law firm of Flex, Flox, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal snoot. We'll just send them off.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, from deep in the heart of Texas, from Santa Barbara.
And Newhall.
Thank you, and Newhall.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more happenings in our crazy industry.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
Our thanks to Ann and Chris for being with us today. And remember what Ming would say, go out and vote. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
So long, everyone.